multiple cycles we've talked about before, but I just want to remind you of the TWI process where we had, started with this huge idea of, H2O, and more particularly, even though we're in there, we're talking about really non-municipal markets. And then we started with really quite a whole, universe of, the hyped nano technologies, plus all proven water, purification technologies. And this is a huge universe. And then, the business models started off with thinking about things like the base of the pyramid I mentioned, and many other models. There's different kinds of distribution models. BOP, you could think of that as being much more of a, in a way, it ends up being like a franchise model, if you want to think about it that way, where, as you're working with particular communities on the ground, they want to go out and sell the co-developed product, and therefore that group that wants to go out and sell that, obviously gets a piece of the action, and there's multiple groups. And so that's kind of a franchise model, if you will. I mean, it's not exactly the right terminology, but anyway, there's many, many ways to think about doing this. As we narrowed this, we first realized that there's a group of technologies for pathogens, bacteria, viruses, cysts, and then there was a group for, let's call it, elemental removal, fluorine, arsine, lead, arsenic, lead, that kind of thing. And then, there's organics. So, there's all these different categories, so we narrow it, but we didn't jump to, for example, a lot of people were saying, in here, and I mentioned this before, carbon nanotubes. They're the latest, greatest thing. Don't we want to use them for water purification? And of course, by not jumping in and saying it's carbon nanotubes, and it's a particular kind of water device, and we're going to, sell it through the web, that would be an example of doing one pass and boom, boom. Now, a lot of people do that, and of course it takes only 1 out of 2,000 for that to work, and then everybody does that. And the driving force for doing that, by the way, is if I do pick something and make huge jumps with one is I might not have people that can drill in deeper. That's a huge problem, is that I need people that can really look at all these areas, where a lot of people, more or less wing it. They kind of have like a feeling, and of course that takes on a lot of risk. But if you do what we're doing here, you've narrowed this space down somewhat, and you've learned about these things. And then you look at your market application, and then, as I said, we were concentrating on point of use, and then we were looking at, particular markets in Mexico, the U.S. So I'm just drawing, these are particular market applications change in each one of these. And implementation, I think I mentioned that the government partnership was a new one that we were playing with that initially wasn't really involved in the BOP. It was in the sense that there is obviously some sort of government relationship with the BOP as well, but we had narrowed it down to, hey, maybe that might happen. Maybe we'll do direct consumer sales, and then maybe we'll still have BOP. So, what happened over time, of course, was that there was an initial product that spun out and became an innovation, actually. The way to think about that is the BOP ended up intersecting with elemental removal and intersected with the franchise model. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's the BOP. I messed this up. The application, sorry, actually let me do it right because I've been very consistent, so let me put BOP down here in implementation, and let me put the market here, ended up being Central Valley, Mexico. So when I say Central Valley, Mexico, there's particular, you can think about it like an application. It's a geographic destination here, but what I mean is that there's particular kinds of ways in that elemental removal is important to that area. So I'm just summarizing it here. Now, what we did was we realized that that's an innovation, but it turns out to be a modest one. And if you have investment, which is in implementation, by the way, if you think about it, it's another form of how do you get it. It's kind of like government partnership. All these sort of models convolute in them financing. And so it turns out that a far more scalable, meaning growth, it was growing faster, is that we realized that when we had the government partnership and sorry, I did this again, the government partnership, and we did arsenic removal, technically, and then still same area, Central Valley. When we ended up with a much more scalable innovation. So here's the case where iterative innovation, you see we're working, we narrowed things down. We actually have one path, and that produced an innovation, and it's one particular product. But recognizing that the sort of return on capital over time, where we could help more and more people quicker, which is related to, of course, the business growing, was not high enough. So then we actually backed up the truck, right? So now we're backing up, if you will, to the stage. There's nothing to stop you in iteration from going backwards. We show this as a continuous process, but here we're backing up the truck and then reconverging on a new innovation. And so far, to this date in 2013, the very, very beginning of 2013, we've installed over 25,000 units with another 25,000 units on order. So basically, much, much faster growth in a very short period of time. This is all within like a year and a half or so. So, hopefully that gives you an idea about how iterating is very important. If we had jumped right to these elements, obviously they weren't going to converge. If we picked point of use in Mexico Central Valley here, which would have been the right choice because it turns out that there is a big need there. But if we had said carbon nanotubes and we're going to distribute it through the web, obviously it wouldn't have converged. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what we're doing in this iterative process. So just to summarize, we've introduced graphical representation. I hope that through all the examples we gave, including this last iteration one, that it's starting to become kind of clear. We've introduced a concept of multiple loops, even in this last example, that we can back up and even let it reconverge in a different area. And that allows you to fully develop innovation pathways that have higher probability. And we introduced the concept of multiple iterative loops, allowing for the full development of higher probability pathways. I especially like the TWI model because it shows that you can back up the truck, that we started not only like that, we narrowed it down, we found a true innovation, but we actually then went back and then found one that was a little bit more successful, even though it took a little bit longer time. And so, as long as you have the resources and the time, you can go back and forth. Of course, a large corporation does this all the time. Large corporation might converge, on something fantastic like the microprocessor, which throws off revenue for many years, and you do incremental innovation on this, which we'll talk about in the next lecture, back and forth. But then you can afford to fund, new kinds of things that might create new innovations by going back to your strengths that since you had already learned and abstracted to this point, and you can go forward again trying to converge on new innovations. So this model, as you see going forward, will eventually allow organizations to think about how they would be able to organize themselves and think about this process of doing multiple innovations over time, allowing you to become the true innovation corporation.